Evolution of game design. Have you ever wondered about how video game design has changed? Let's start at the very beginning, where video games were just starting to be created. Video games used to be quite simple in the early 1970s. Many of their playing fields took up just one screen. Objects and players were made up of lines, dots, or blocks, like in the game Pong. Pong, made in 1972, is basically the online version of ping pong. It had a plain black background, a dotted line for a net, and two short straight lines that moved up and down on each side as virtual paddles. Gotcha, made by Atari in 1973, was one of the first video games to use color. A tinted overlay was used as a way to change the color tone of the entire screen. At the same time, a true multicolor version was made with red, blue, and green colors. Artists in the early 70s attempted to create visually stimulating artwork, but most lacked multicolor graphics and sprite-based graphics. Sprites are functioning objects like trees, characters, and monsters. In 1979, the game Galaxian featured animated multicolored sprites. Its system had animated sprites over a scrolling background, which is when a game creates the illusion of a character moving, but it's actually the background which moves. In 1980, games like Mystery House were beginning to have simple black and white graphical scenes. The graphics consist of simple white line drawings of a house, and its rooms and stick figures of people against a black background. Mystery House is a text-based adventure game with characters like a butcher and cook inside of the mystery house. The goal is to figure out who is going to die next after a chain of people have already been found dead. What technology changes were made that allowed artists to improve the quality of graphics? Well, newer hardware had more capacity in it to hold more complicated programs, which enabled artists to include more detail and sophistication in the graphics. More memory meant bigger textures with more detail for game players to see. More processing power in computers allowed for more sophisticated lighting at the same frame rate. Improvements in screens allow us to see higher quality graphics. Sega Genesis, released in 1989, was a 16-bit home video console as opposed to the 8-bit of previous game consoles. Bits, like 16-bit, simply means the amount of pixels used to create the images. For example, 8-bit looked rather unclear because of the lack of pixels. With more pixels, the Sega Genesis improved the image quality of the game. Unlike the earlier games with only several colors, the Sega Genesis had 64 colors and 183 colors for shadow and highlight mode. Shadow and highlight mode allows the brightness of pixels to be adjusted to 3 different levels: normal, shadow, and highlight. Using the Sega Genesis, a game released at the time was called B17 Bomber, which took advantage of these technologies. This is a single-player game where the player controls a simulated bomber aircraft. The objective of the game is to complete missions by dropping bombs on targets in continental Europe. Many other good art designs were released around this time, in games such as Toe Jam and Earl, released in 1991, which is an action game about alien rappers called Toe Jam and Earl who crash landed on Earth. In the 2000s, cascading style sheets, also known as CSS, simplified web design by allowing designers to create templates that would remain consistent across multiple pages of a site. This helped designers save time by not having to code each page and template individually. There were many different games in the 2000s. One example is Roblox. When Roblox was first created in 2004, it was created in 3D. However, when characters moved, the animation was laggy. Although there was a chat feature, it was blurry and messages that were typed faded, so people wouldn't be able to see the messages again if they needed to. Now, chat messages stay in the game unless you close it. Godfall is also a game with wonderful graphics. Godfall is a next-gen game that recently came out on PS5 and PC. Graphics-wise, it looks gorgeous. There are a lot of reflective surfaces, a lot of particle effects, and some truly amazing lighting effects. Overall, the evolution of game art has changed a lot. With new technologies, there are a lot of ways artists can change the way they make characters more detailed and backgrounds. Special effects have been added too, making games exciting and intense. For instance, the screen turns red in Minecraft when the player dies, And in Among Us, when the power goes out, the screen slowly becomes darker and darker until you can only see your player. With all of these things said and done, I hope you learned something about the evolution of game design from my capstone project.